Why would an entire hospital be abandoned overnight without warning, without explanation? And why, to this day, can no one stay there for very long? They say that in the hills of a small town forgotten by time lies a hospital where silence holds weight, and shadows seem to watch whoever dares to cross its gates. The walls are covered in mold and cracks, the ceiling slowly caves in, and the air has that ancient smell of rust and bad memories. But what's most frightening isn't what you see, it's what you hear. Whispers coming from empty rooms, footsteps echoing in corridors too long, and voices calling out the names of those who should never have entered. The place became known as the Hollow Creek Abandoned Hospital, and over time it gained a new name among the residents, the Hospital of the Missing. No one knows for sure how many people disappeared there, but there are records, police reports, and testimonies that tell of young people who went in to film videos and never returned. There are also reports from police officers who swear they heard crying coming from the second floor, even when they knew no one was inside. Have you ever walked through a place that felt alive, where the wind whispers things you don't want to understand, where every footstep echoes as if someone were right behind you? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you and maybe even make you think twice about entering any abandoned building. The hospital was built in the 1950s, during a time when the town was still thriving with mining. Officially, it served as a treatment center for respiratory diseases, but over the years, what began as a normal hospital became a place of rumors, experiments, and fear. Staff began resigning, patients reported voices coming from the walls, and entire medical records mysteriously disappeared from the archives. To this day, no one knows what truly prompted the sudden closure, only that one rainy night, all the lights were turned off and the gate was locked forever. But forever is a dangerous word, because decades later, curious people and explorers returned to the site, determined to discover what remained inside. Many left terrified, saying they felt invisible hands touching their shoulders or heard someone whisper their names. Others were simply never seen again. Older residents of the area avoid passing by. Some claim to see lights turning on inside the building in the early hours of the morning. Others say the hospital was built on an ancient indigenous cemetery. But there are also those who believe in something much more human and much more cruel. That there, within the dirty walls and silent corridors, lie hidden secrets of crimes that have never been revealed. When police attempted to investigate, they found sealed doors, tampered with records, and an entire hospital wing blocked off by concrete. No official documents explain why. And that's exactly where the real mystery begins. The sound of footsteps that belong to no one, cameras that capture distant voices and objects that move on their own. All of this seems to compose the same pattern of a story that time has tried to erase, but that insists on repeating itself. Is the hospital cursed? Or is there something much more real and much darker, hidden behind the timeless walls? What happened to the people who went in there and never came out? The answer may lie in the following images, and perhaps, when you hear what they reveal, you won't be able to sleep the same way again. Have you ever wondered what really happened inside certain old hospitals? Those immense buildings, full of broken windows and long corridors, where time seems to have stood still. Places that were once teeming with life, but now breathe only silence, dust, and memories no one wants to remember. What causes an entire hospital to be hastily abandoned, with charts left on tables, beds still covered with sheets, and doors locked from the inside? The Hollow Creek Hospital was born as a symbol of hope. It was the pride of a small rural town, built in the 1950s, when the country was still trying to rebuild after the war. An imposing building with solid modern architecture for its time, perched atop a hill surrounded by dense forests. From a distance it looked like a refuge, but those who stepped inside felt something else, a cold, heavy energy that clashed with the promise of healing it represented. Officially, it was inaugurated as a sanatorium for the treatment of respiratory diseases. especially tuberculosis, which at the time was devastating thousands of families. Renowned doctors came from various parts of the country, lured by high salaries and promises of scientific advancement. But amid the immaculate hallways and white walls, something began to change. Patients reported strange noises in the early morning hours, as if someone were moving through the rooms, even after everyone was asleep. Some claimed to hear voices whispering their names and calling them to the basement of the building, where supposedly the disinfection equipment was located. At first, no one paid attention. They were just sick, frail people on strong medications. It was easy to blame fever, fear, or loneliness. But then the first disappearances began. A nurse vanished on the night shift. A doctor left his lab coat hanging and never returned. And yet, the hospital administration insisted everything was under control. Have you ever felt like something was wrong in a place, even without knowing what? That kind of feeling that makes your skin crawl and your heart race, as if the environment itself was warning you to get out. That's exactly how the few survivors described the atmosphere inside the hospital during its final years. Over time, the place's reputation began to change. What was once synonymous with healing became seen as a house of suffering. Documents found later show records of unexplained deaths, incomplete reports, and even patients buried without their families' permission. Some employees resigned, alleging harassment, nocturnal rituals, and treatments that went far beyond what the medical profession of the time would allow. The town tried to ignore the rumors, but the number of victims grew, and the hospital walls began to tell stories of their own. Dark stains that wouldn't come off with paint, rusty instruments locked in sealed rooms, and that sound, the constant dripping sound, even when the pipes had been dry for decades. In 1973, without warning or official explanation, the hospital was closed. All remaining patients were hastily transferred. Documents were destroyed, and within days, absolute silence fell over the building. Those who tried to get closer reported hearing distant echoes, as if former patients still wandered the halls, searching for medicine that never arrived. Hollow Creek residents say that back then, no one dared climb the hill after sunset. The few who tried returned with stories of figures in the windows and muffled screams coming from the second floor, where, curiously, the isolation ward was located. What really happened within those walls? Was the hospital closed due to negligence, insanity, or something much darker? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover could completely change the way you view that forgotten building, and maybe make you understand why some places just seem to refuse to die. Have you ever walked into a place that felt alive? Where the silence is heavy, the air seems to watch, and every footstep echoes as if someone or something is walking right behind you. There are places in the world that seem to hold an energy of their own, as if they breathe, and the ancient Hollow Creek Hospital is one of them. A building forgotten by time, hidden among twisted trees and shrouded in a mist that never quite dissipates. From a distance, it looks like just another abandoned ruin. But those who have been inside assure us it is not empty. The first supernatural reports began shortly after the hospital closed. Locals claimed to hear strange sounds coming from the top of the hill, shuffling footsteps, doors slamming shut, and sometimes voices that seemed to be calling for help. At first, many laughed at the stories, saying they were just the wind or the rustling of branches. But what you're about to discover may surprise you, because not all sounds can be explained logically. One of the best-known stories is that of Thomas Weaver, a police officer patrolling the area in 1981. He recounted receiving a report one night that vandals had broken into the building. As he entered with his flashlight in hand, he heard what he described as a groaning sound coming from one of the hallways. As he approached, he felt the air turn cold and noticed all the doors around him begin to slam shut at once. Weaver fled, dropping his radio, and vowed never to return. To the end of his life, he maintained the same version of the story and avoided even looking in the direction of the hospital. Do you believe in residual energy? In places that absorb human suffering and return it as presence? Some researchers say Hollow Creek Hospital has become a kind of spiritual prison, where echoes of the past keep repeating themselves night after night. Urban explorers who have ventured inside describe the same pattern: an oppressive feeling, cameras that freeze for no reason, and that unmistakable discomfort of being watched, even when alone. In 1996, a group of journalism students decided to film an amateur documentary about the hospital. They were there for only 3 hours, but the recovered footage revealed something no one could explain. In the video, a female voice can clearly be heard saying, "Don't leave." The detail: no women were on the staff. The audio was analyzed, compared, and dismissed as interference. But to this day, anyone who hears the sound gets chills. There is also the report of Helen McCarthy, a retired nurse who worked in the hospital's final months of operation. In an interview years later, she recounted how, during night shifts, she would hear crying and laughing coming from the isolation corridor, even when all the patients were asleep. Once, while checking the area, she saw a figure standing at the end of the corridor, a human silhouette, motionless, that disappeared as soon as she blinked. "That day," Helen said, "I realized the hospital didn't want to be forgotten." Have you ever experienced this? That feeling of something watching you even when no one's around? Many who venture into Hollow Creek describe it exactly like this: an invisible force, a constant gaze, a silent presence. And the longer you spend inside, the heavier the air seems to grow, as if the building itself were trying to keep you from leaving. Today, the hospital is a meeting place for the curious and ghost hunters. Some say the place is cursed, others believe it's simply a place with a history too tragic to be forgotten. But there's one detail everyone mentions: those who enter leave different. Whether out of fear or because of something really happening inside, stay with me until the end. Because in the following images, you'll learn about the most disturbing stories ever recorded inside Hollow Creek Hospital, and understand why so many believe those walls hold something that goes far beyond what we can see. Have you ever heard of places that seem to swallow people? Places where someone enters and simply never returns? Places where time seems to stop, and the line between reality and the impossible is completely erased. Well, that's exactly what happened to Hollow Creek Hospital, the building that started as an urban legend and ended up becoming a real case of true crime and mysterious disappearances. For decades, stories about voices and shadows at the hospital were confined to rumors, locals' tales and recordings from urban explorers. But everything changed when people began to disappear for real. What was once just superstition turned into a frightening pattern: people who entered that building and were never seen again. The first documented case was that of Ethan Miller, a 22-year-old with a passion for abandoned places. He ran a small YouTube channel about urban exploration and decided in 2003 to enter the hospital with 2 friends. The group spent the night inside, recording every corner, and in the recovered footage, Ethan can be heard saying, "There's someone in here. I swear I heard footsteps." The cameras were found 2 days later, broken, just a few meters from the main entrance. But Ethan disappeared. No trace, no clue. The 2 friends ran away in despair, vowing never to speak of the matter again. The disappearance caught the attention of the local press, which began to investigate. The possibility that the hospital had become the scene of some kind of sect or ritual. Residents reported seeing lights turning on by themselves during the early hours of the morning and figures standing in third-floor windows, the same floor where Ethan was last seen. And that's when the cases began to multiply. In 2007, 2 independent researchers, Mark E. Olivia Thompson, decided to enter the hospital with professional recording equipment. They wanted to prove it was all a myth, and even broadcast part of the exploration live. The broadcast ended abruptly when a shrill sound took over the audio, and the image went black. When the police arrived at the scene, they found the tripod, the backpacks, and a voice recorder still working. In the last minute of the audio, a sentence echoes amid the hiss, "Don't look up. Neither of them has been found to date." Have you ever been to that kind of place that seems to be watching you back? Where the silence seems to hold something, as if the very air carries a memory that won't be forgotten. That's the feeling many report at Hollow Creek. Even seasoned investigators report that the hospital feels vivo, reacting to the human presence, as if something inside was still fighting not to be revealed. In 2011, a volunteer fire department was called after residents reported seeing smoke coming from the building. They found no fire, but they discovered something even more disturbing. In the basement, there were handprints on the walls, made with a dark substance and a series of hastily scrawled names, including Ethan Miller's. No tests were able to definitively identify the stain's material, and the case was closed. What makes it all even stranger is that, even with so many disappearances, no conclusive evidence was found. The cameras installed by investigators were missing, the audio recordings were choppy, and the few survivors who tried to speak publicly soon gave up, claiming threats and recurring visions. Stay with me until the end, because what follows goes far beyond any rational explanation. There's something about this hospital that seems to defy the laws of logic, something that connects each of these disappearances in a way no one has yet understood. And when you hear what the latest investigation uncovers, you'll realize that perhaps the hospital was never truly empty. Have you ever wondered what happens when the truth is scarier than the legend itself? When evidence disappears, accounts contradict each other, and no one seems to really want to find out what's behind it all. That's exactly what the Hollow Creek Hospital mystery, a case that, decades later, still provokes debates, theories, and a strange feeling that something much bigger and darker is being hidden. After the unexplained disappearances, authorities were forced to act. The media pressed on, families demanded answers, and stories about the hospital began to spread like wildfire. Soon, Hollow Creek went from being just a forgotten town to the epicenter of one of the most enigmatic cases in recent history. But what did the investigation reveal? Or rather, what they couldn't explain, is what keeps this story alive to this day. The local police began their searches according to protocol, forensic examination of the ruins, collecting impressions and analyzing the recordings found. But according to reports from former investigators, something seemed to be interfering with everything. Equipment was failing inside the hospital, radios were losing signal, and some video cameras were simply turning off by themselves. One of the most experienced investigators described the feeling of being watched constantly, as if the building were reacting to their presence. Have you ever felt something like that? That inexplicable chill when you're certain someone is behind you, but the room is completely empty. Despite official efforts, no concrete evidence was found. No bodies, no footprints, no clear clues to explain so many disappearances. And that's when the theories began. Some completely logical, others completely unrealistic. The first theory said that the hospital was secretly used for rituals of a local sect. Neighbors reported seeing lights on in the early morning and hooded figures entering the woods. One resident claimed to have heard chanting and rhythmic banging coming from underground, always at the same time, shortly after 3 a.m. But when police tried to investigate the basement, they found the doors sealed with rusty chains and strange symbols scratched into the walls. Nothing had been removed. No official report mentions these details. Another hypothesis gained strength among the investigators themselves. The hospital would have been the scene of illegal medical experiments. Old documents suggest that in the 1960s, the government quietly funded research on terminally ill patients in remote institutions. Drug trials, electric shocks, sensory deprivation. Coincidentally, the name of one of the doctors involved in these projects also appears in Hollow Creek's records. But when reporters tried to confirm, the files had disappeared from public systems as if they had never existed. And then there's the most disturbing explanation that something supernatural really is at work there. Paranormalists and ghost hunters claim the hospital functions as intersection point between dimensions, a place where the energy of the dead and the despair of the living mingle. Audio recorders have captured voices, cameras have captured shadows, and some visitors have reported hearing the screams of the missing echoing within the walls. It's impossible to prove, but also impossible to ignore. Stay with me until the end, because the deeper you dive into this mystery, the more you realize that official investigations seem to hide more than they reveal. Reports disappear, witnesses change their stories, and those trying to find the truth end up disappearing or giving up. The Hollow Creek case has become a web of contradictions where the real and the supernatural coexist. What really happened there? Was it human crime, a military conspiracy, or something that defies any logical explanation? Perhaps the answer will never emerge, or perhaps the truth was buried along with those who dared to seek it. Do you believe people who swear they've seen the impossible? When someone returns from a cursed place claiming that something is still inside, do you listen with curiosity or fear? Hollow Creek Hospital has been the scene of crimes, experiments, and unexplained disappearances. But what's most frightening aren't those who never returned. That's what they say, those who managed to get out of there alive. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear now could completely change your mind about the Hollow Creek case. Over the past 20 years, dozens of people have claimed to have entered the hospital ruins: urban explorers, journalists, curious onlookers, and even former employees who worked there before its closure. All claim to have experienced something they can't explain. The curious thing is that no two accounts are alike. Some describe an invisible presence, others swear they heard voices coming from the corridors. And there are those who claim to have seen human figures standing in the darkness, silently observing, but who disappeared when anyone tried to approach. One of the best-known accounts is that of Michael Turner, an independent documentary filmmaker who in 2009 decided to spend an entire night filming inside the building. According to him, the first few hours were normal, just the sound of the wind and the creaking of doors. But around 2 a.m., his camera began to malfunction, recording metallic noises and distant voices that weren't present in the room. When Michael left, the clock read 7 a.m. The problem? The footage showed the sunrise 2 hours earlier. He completely lost track of time. Already, Samantha Collins, a reporter for a local newspaper, entered the hospital with a crew to record a story about the place's abandonment. In an interview, she stated that while filming, she heard footsteps upstairs, but the stairs were collapsed. No one could have been there. When they watched the footage, they noticed a shadow moving slowly down the hallway, almost as if it knew it was being filmed. It didn't look human, she said, but it didn't look like a ghost either. It was something somewhere between the two, and it wasn't just the occasional visitors. Some former employees also broke their silence. A retired nurse who worked at Hollow Creek in the late 1970s revealed that the hospital had a reputation for being cursed even before its closure. Patients reported seeing people in lab coats wandering through their rooms, even when no one was on duty. He said that one night, a doctor was rushed to the hospital by a panicked nurse. She swore the patient in bed 12 was sitting up and talking, despite having been pronounced dead 3 hours earlier. No report was filed. No explanation was given. Have you ever experienced something that logic can't explain? A feeling, an image, a sound that just doesn't add up? Hollow Creek survivors say the hospital feels like absorb whoever enters, that there's something there that feeds on fear, memories, and time. Some return different, quiet, confused, with memory lapses. Others simply never speak of it again. There are recordings, distorted audio, and blurry images still circulating on obscure internet forums. In one, a female voice can be heard whispering someone's name. Another shows a motionless figure at the end of a hallway, lit only by a flashlight. No one knows who filmed it. No one knows who was there, what really happened inside that hospital. Why do only a few make it out? And what happens to those who return? Stay with me, because in the next scenes you'll find out the testimonies that transformed the legend into something much more real. And after that, you may never look at an abandoned building the same way again. Have you ever wondered what happens when a place refuses to die? When the walls, even covered in mold and dust, still seem to breathe? And watch, Hollow Creek Hospital is more than a forgotten ruin. It's a sanctuary of echoes and secrets, where the past still whispers through the corridors, and where every shadow seems to carry a memory or a warning. Throughout this story, you've heard about the mysterious disappearances, the voices recorded in the early hours of the morning, the accounts of people who entered and were never seen again. You've also seen the contradictions in the investigations, the omitted documents, the testimonies the police tried to bury. But after all this, one question remains unanswered. What really happened inside that hospital? And perhaps most importantly, why does he still look alive? Some say Hollow Creek has been cursed since its founding, that the secret experiments conducted in the basements left scars that time cannot erase. Others believe the apparitions, noises, and disappearances are the result of mass hysteria, a myth fueled by years of fear and imagination. But there are also those who assert that the hospital is not empty, that something remains there, trapped between worlds, waiting for someone curious enough to awaken it. Have you ever felt that inexplicable chill, like someone is watching you even when you're alone? Many who have passed through the rusted gates of Hollow Creek describe it exactly, dense, suffocating presence, which seems to move with you, like a shadow that refuses to move away. Some say the hospital calls certain people, that it chooses who should enter and who should never leave. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear now might surprise you. Even after decades of abandonment, recent reports still emerge. Residents claim to hear screams at night. Explorers attempting to film the site report unexplained equipment failures. And there are even videos, few, fragmented, often taken down, showing figures crossing the corridors. Coincidence? Montage? Or evidence that hospital was never really abandoned? Authorities are trying to close the case. The land has been sealed off, access prohibited, but official silence has only fueled speculation. The more you try to hide something, the deeper the mystery becomes. And the Hollow Creek case now crosses the line between crime and the supernatural. It has become a modern legend, a blend of fear, curiosity, and buried truth. Do you believe in curses? Or do you think every place harbors an energy, a residue left by everything that happened there? Many spiritual researchers say that the hospital is like an open wound, incapable of healing, that each person who enters carries a piece of the accumulated pain, and likewise leaves something of themselves inside. That's why the mystery seems never-ending. It renews itself with each generation. Perhaps the disappearances were never solved because there was never a human explanation. Perhaps the voices, the noises, and the shadows are simply a reflection of a suffering that refuses to be forgotten. Or perhaps the hospital is still fulfilling its purpose, one that goes far beyond medicine, reason, or life. And this is where you need to ask yourself, has Hollow Creek Hospital really been abandoned? Or have the living simply stopped coming in? If this story gave you goosebumps, made you think, or simply piqued your curiosity, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who loves mysteries as much as you do. Because what we're telling here isn't just an urban legend. It's a reminder that the past never stays entirely in the past. Stay with me, because maybe, in the next stories, the truth will start to whisper again. And while the hospital lights seem to stay on, even when no one is inside, the story of Hollow Creek lives on, fueled by every new person who listens, doubts, shivers, and comments. Because deep down, this kind of mystery doesn't survive alone. It needs someone to question it, someone to feel something, someone who allows themselves to sink into doubt. If this topic makes sense to you, if at any point in this story you felt that shiver running down your spine, leave here in the comments what touched you the most. Do you believe there's something supernatural about this place? Or do you think everything can be explained by the human mind, by fear, by suggestion, by the stories we tell ourselves? I want to know what you think, really. These comments aren't just words thrown around, they're part of the investigation. Every opinion, every personal account, every memory of a place that seemed to have something strange helps piece together this puzzle that time insists on hiding. And if until now you've stayed with me, trying to understand what's behind the silence of that hospital, enjoy and leave your like. It may seem like a simple click, but it shows that this type of content matters to you and makes this story reach more people who, like us, have the courage to look the inexplicable in the face. Every like, every comment, every share is like a lantern lit in the darkness. And that's what keeps this community alive, that believes that not every mystery should be forgotten. And of course, if you're not already part of the channel, sign up now here. Each video is a new investigation, a new enigma, a new true story where the supernatural and crime collide. When you subscribe, you're not just following along, you're becoming part of something bigger. A group of curious, skeptical people, yet open to the unknown. People who aren't content with the official, who want to understand what lies behind the versions, the silences, and the shadows. So, comment on what you felt, like it, and subscribe. Because that's what keeps this space alive, like a flame burning in the darkness, guiding us through the mysteries the world insists on hiding. And speaking of hiding, what comes next may completely change the way you view everything you've heard so far. Stick with me, because the next part will leave you with more questions than answers. Have you ever stopped to imagine what it would be like to enter a place that seems to breathe on its own? A building where silence isn't just an absence of sound, but a palpable, almost suffocating presence, and every hallway echoes memories no one should remember. That's exactly what the Hollow Creek Hospital, a building abandoned for decades, hidden high on a secluded hill, surrounded by twisted trees and a fog that never quite dissipates. The first sight of its broken windows, peeling walls, and endless corridors provokes a feeling of both curiosity and fear, a dangerous mix that seems to attract precisely those who shouldn't approach. What's most striking is not just its state of disrepair, but the history that accompanies it. Old documents, faded records, and yellowed photos show that, at the height of its operations, Hollow Creek was considered one of the most modern hospitals in the region. But there are details that elude explanation. Corridors that creaked even when there was no wind, doors that slammed shut, the sound of shuffling footsteps when no one was around. And little by little, the official narrative began to conflict with the accounts of residents, urban explorers, and professionals who still lived in the town. Psychological impact. The impact of these events was profound, because what should have been a space for healing became a stage for unrest and distrust. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because we're not just talking about abandoned walls and furniture. We're talking about a contained energy, of a hidden truth, something that seems to react to the presence of anyone who dares to cross its rusted gates. Those who enter describe a feeling of being watched, of the corridors lengthening and changing shape, as if the building itself were manipulating the perception of those who walk by. It's an experience that blends perception, mind, and reality, and if you've ever experienced something similar in another context, you know how the body reacts before the mind processes the danger. Walking through the hospital, it's impossible not to feel that every decision made there, every step, every glance, every hallway choice carries intense emotional weight. The environment demands absolute attention, and any distraction can be costly. It's as if the hospital is testing the mentality of those who enter, assessing courage, fear, determination, and even the ability to accept that which defies human logic. And that's precisely what makes Hollow Creek so fascinating and at the same time so dangerous. Every wall tells a story. Every abandoned room, every empty bed, Every torn document suggests a journey that was interrupted, a narrative that official history never dared to record. And when we talk about real-life accounts, the feeling is even more intense. Former employees tell of records erased without explanation, patients who claim to hear voices or see shadows moving through the hallways, and doctors who disappeared without a trace. There are also stories of young people who entered simply to film, record images, or explore what they considered mere ruins, and were never seen again. Backpacks were found abandoned, cameras were broken, recordings were abruptly interrupted, and no convincing explanation emerged. All of this reinforces the feeling that Hollow Creek is not just an abandoned building, but a place where reality and mystery intertwine, creating an environment that challenges both body and mind. Most disturbingly, even in the face of so many disappearances and strange reports, the city still maintains an almost conniving silence. Local authorities rarely comment, and official documents, when found, often contradict witness accounts. It's as if there's a systematic effort to keep this story buried, to erase the evidence, or at least to obscure the truth that continues to pulse within those walls. The very atmosphere of the place seems to conspire to prevent anyone from fully grasping what really happens there. And then, just when you think you've grasped the magnitude of the place, you realize that every shadow, every echoing corridor, and every broken window seems to hold a secret. Secrets that can't be fully explained, that defy logic, that require you to confront something greater than mere physical reality. There's a sense that the hospital transforms into a living organism when someone enters, reacting to every emotion, every hesitation, every silent step. It's a transformative experience, intense and deeply disconcerting, and which leaves marks on the mind even after leaving the building. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding Hollow Creek requires more than observing the walls, listening to the echoes, or reading old records. It requires delving behind the scenes, into the subtle details, into the signs that have been ignored for decades, and beginning to question what it truly means to be alive in a place where the line between the real and the inexplicable dissolves. Every decision made within the hospital, every choice to walk or retreat, every moment of silence or abrupt noise, all of this is part of a puzzle that challenges perception, courage, and understanding. And it is precisely at this point that we realize that Hollow Creek is not just a physical place, but a space that provokes transformation of those who enter, of those who observe, and of those who dare to imagine what lies hidden within, even today, decades after its official closure. Returning explorers report intense feelings of disorientation, time lapses, and captured images that don't match what they saw with their own eyes. The hospital seems to hold its own memory, and each person who passes through its gates adds a new layer to what is already a collective enigma. The experience there is not just physical. It is emotional, psychological, and even spiritual, shaping the perception of those who experience it and leaving a lasting impression that often defies explanation. And it's at this point that the big question arises. If all of this, the abandonment, the disappearances, the supernatural accounts, can be recorded, documented, and felt, then what truly defines reality within Hollow Creek? What is truth, what is perception, and what is something that completely escapes human comprehension? It's a fine line, and each visitor perceives it differently, but all recognize the same impact, something there is capable of changing the way you understand what is safe, what is normal, and even what is possible. Now, if you've been following this far, you realize this story isn't just about an abandoned building. It's about decisions that transform perception, about experiences that shake the mind, and about a hidden truth that insists on revealing itself little by little between echoes and shadows. It's the feeling of being face to face with something that defies logic and reality, something that provokes reflection and unease. And that reminds us of how thin the lines are between courage, curiosity, and fear. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. Have you ever stopped to imagine how a place can be built for the purpose of healing and, at the same time, transform into something no one can fully understand? That's exactly how the Hollow Creek Hospital in the 1950s, a time marked by medical advances, but also by practices that today seem almost unimaginable. Originally planned as a psychiatric hospital for the entire region, it was intended to accommodate patients with severe mental disorders, offering treatments that, at the time, were considered revolutionary. Documents from the time show that the building was constructed with significant investment, using cutting-edge materials, modern equipment, and a specialized clinical staff. But while the hospital seemed promising from the outside, its history already showed signs that something was amiss. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the hospital's past is crucial to understanding the mystery that surrounds it today. Testimonies from former employees, old records, and even yellowed photographs reveal that the routine inside the hospital wasn't just difficult. It was marked by a climate of tension and constant fear. Patients reported hearing voices in the hallways at night, reports of shadows moving beyond their field of vision, and some even claimed to be watched by unseen presences. Meanwhile, medical records point to an unusually high number of unexplained deaths, incidents of patients disappearing within the wards, and reports of mistreatment ranging from neglect to practices that today would be considered cruel and illegal. Old photographs, which still exist in public and private archives, show clean hallways, smiling staff, and seemingly calm patients. However, those who observed closely notice subtle details: doors ajar when they shouldn't be, unmade beds, shadows that seem out of place on the walls. It's a stark contrast between the official narrative of medical progress and what really happened behind the scenes at the hospital. There are testimonies from retired nurses who, even decades later, still can't talk about what they witnessed without showing obvious nervousness. They tell of screams in the middle of the night, patients who refused to speak, and doctors who disappeared for days without any plausible explanation. The emotional impact on patients was immense. Imagine being in a place designed to treat your mind, but where every decision made by those responsible can be either salvation or an invisible threat. Reports describe procedures that went beyond the conventional, experiments with sensory deprivation, shock therapies, and experimental medications, many of which lacked clear documentation or formal authorization. This type of practice, common in psychiatric hospitals of the time, created an environment conducive to transforming fear into something almost tangible, a constant weight on everyone inside, whether patient or employee. Over the years, the hospital's administration itself began to undergo mysterious changes. Directors and doctors came and went, some disappeared without explanation, and abrupt decisions to close wards generated suspicion. Some records suggest that the official reason for the complete closure, which occurred in the early 1970s, was linked to a lack of resources and changes in mental health legislation. However, longtime residents and former employees report that there was more to it. Stories of secret experiments, disappearances of patients, voices in the corridors, and phenomena that escaped human understanding circulated for decades. Always surrounded by official silence and contradictions in documents, it's curious to see how the hospital's archives, which should be a clear record of history, often contradict oral accounts or private documents that survive to this day. While an administrative record describes a ward closed due to lack of patients, testimonies suggest that practices took place in that same place that no one dared to officially document. It's as if the hospital had two lives, one visible, official, and one hidden, full of mysteries, unrevealed truths, and events that defied logic. The building's very construction seemed to reflect this duality. Long, symmetrical corridors, designed to facilitate the flow of patients, became labyrinths that confused any visitor. Rooms designed for comfort became silent cells, where echoes of the past remain alive. And that's exactly what contradiction between appearance and reality, between intention and impact, which makes Hollow Creek so fascinating and unsettling. Anyone who enters today feels this tension, even without knowing the historical details. It's as if the walls have memories of their own, capable of recording every step, every whisper, and every decision made within. The hospital's trajectory, from its inauguration to its closure, shows us not only the evolution of medicine, but also the limits of human perception in the face of the unknown. It's impossible to separate the physical structure from the psychological structure that formed there, a place that transforms experiences into echoes and memories, into mystery. And the more we delve into the archives, testimonies, and evidence, the more we realize that Hollow Creek is not just an abandoned building. It is a space charged with history, decision, and profound emotional impact. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding the historical context of the hospital is not just about revisiting the past, but realizing how each choice, each protocol, each incident contributed to the mystery that persists to this day. Every empty hallway, every broken window, every shadow that seems to move inexplicably is the result of decisions, experiences, and events that have shaped Hollow Creek's trajectory, transforming it into a place that continues to defy logic, provoke reflection, and leave unanswered questions. And that's precisely it, intersection between history, perception, and unexplained phenomenon that invites us to look not just at what happened, but how it shapes our understanding of places that carry such intense and complex memories. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Can you imagine what it feels like to be in a place where every sound is amplified by silence, every shadow seems to move of its own accord, and the line between reality and imagination begins to blur? That's exactly how the first visitors to Hollow Creek Hospital described their experience. When the building was still officially known only for its medical history, reports were already emerging from people claiming to have felt something strange while walking through its empty corridors. Urban explorers, investigative journalists, and even on-duty police officers reported experiences that could not be explained by logic or science, and these quickly began to spread among the local population, fueling rumors and fears that persist to this day. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the supernatural accounts of Hollow Creek aren't just scary stories. They reveal a latent energy, almost tangible, that seems to inhabit the building even after decades of abandonment. Some urban explorers report hearing indecipherable whispers as they walk the corridors, voices that seem to call out specific names, echoing in a way no equipment could properly capture. Others describe the sensation of being watched, of something invisible following their every step, altering their perception of space, lengthening corridors, and turning seemingly small rooms into endless mazes. It's as if the hospital were conscious, as if reacting to the presence of each visitor, testing courage, endurance, and perception, and leaving marks that cannot be erased by time. Longtime residents of the area, those who lived near the hospital during its operation, also share experiences that defy explanation. Some remember hearing screams coming from the building even after it officially closed, echoes that dissipated in the air as if someone or something were inside, insisting on being heard. Others report fleeting figures peering through broken windows, shadows that moved abruptly and disappeared when they tried to focus on them with flashlights or cameras. The emotional impact of these experiences is intense. Fear, doubt, adrenaline, and even a sense of awe before what seemed like a hidden truth, a phenomenon that could not be recorded in words or images, but only felt by those who ventured there. Police officers who were called to investigate reports of break-ins or suspicious sounds also fell into this climate of mystery. Some tell of cameras recording distorted images, devices turning off by themselves, and footsteps echoing in an untraceable way. There are reports of officers who, while walking through the hallways, felt chills and the impression they were being followed by something invisible, something that didn't show itself but was intensely present. It's impossible not to wonder if these experiences are a figment of their imagination, amplified by abandonment, fear, and anticipation, or if there really is energy that remains active, almost conscious within the hospital walls. Independent explorers also reveal phenomena that border on the inexplicable. Lanterns that go out for no reason, cameras that capture blurry images of human figures in empty spaces, and audio recordings interrupted by whispers no one can identify. One case, widely documented on urban investigation forums, involves a young man who entered Hollow Creek alone to film his exploration. For hours, nothing unusual happened. But when he reviewed the footage, he noticed that in some frames, figures appeared behind the closed doors, shadows that moved erratically, almost as if they were trying to communicate something. He swore there was nothing there while filming, and yet the recording showed otherwise, leaving the questions suspended between reality and perception. And what's most disturbing is that these accounts aren't just from the curious or explorers. Long-time hospital employees have also begun to open up about experiences that had remained silent for decades. Retired nurses describe patients reporting hearing voices in the night, figures passing through walls or doors, and a constant sense of something invisible in the rooms and hallways. Some doctors recall feeling as if the building itself reacted to their decisions, altering the perception of space and time within certain wards, causing medical logic and routine to completely lose control. These stories suggest that Hollow Creek, even as a ruin, continues to transform the experience of those who pass by, messing with not only physical perception, but also emotions, memory, and even decisions made at the time. Each testimony adds layers to a mystery that seems to grow with time. It's not just fear or superstition. It's experiences that defy explanation, that force any visitor to question their own mindset and perception. The sense that the hospital isn't empty, that it contains a latent energy, creates a constant tension, an expectation that alters every step, every glance, and every reaction. It's as if Hollow Creek functions as a mirror of the mind, reflecting the deepest fears and most intense emotions, but in a way that cannot be completely understood or controlled. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it's not just about hearing stories or analyzing old photos. It's about understanding how Hollow Creek became a focal point for supernatural. Human psychology and the untold story. Every corridor, every room, every broken door is a silent testimony. Proof that the experiences lived there transcend time and defy rational explanation. Explorers report that the building seems to react to their emotions, amplifying sensations of fear, curiosity, and anxiety, and that every attempt to record or explain the phenomena is, in a way, interpreted by the space itself, as if the hospital had a will of its own. And when we stop to consider the emotional impact these experiences have, we realize that Hollow Creek isn't just an abandoned building. It's a place that transforms those who enter, that moves the mind, and that leaves marks that linger long after leaving. Every shadow story, every whisper, every feeling of being watched builds invisible mystery frame, a collective narrative that renews itself with each new experience. What makes it all the more fascinating is that these phenomena are not isolated. They recur over the decades, involving explorers, residents, journalists, and even police officers, creating an almost organic record of something that defies logic and perception. It is at this point that the hospital's story becomes more than just supernatural tales. It becomes emotional journey, a transformative experience that blends reality and mystery and raises questions that may never have definitive answers. The sense that Hollow Creek is not empty is so intense, it's palpable. And each new testimony adds depth to this enigma, reinforcing the idea that there is a hidden truth within the building, a truth that continues to defy logic, perception, and courage. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Have you ever wondered what goes through the mind of someone who enters a place that seems alive, breathing and observing, and who never sees the world the same way again? That's exactly what's happened to dozens of people over the past few decades. Hollow Creek Hospital, where the supernatural and true crime intertwine in a frighteningly intense way. At first, the reports were whispers, tales of shadows, voices echoing through the hallways, brief experiences that could be attributed to the imagination of urban explorers or fear of the unknown. But over time, these reports began to take on a much more serious dimension: disappearances. Young people who entered only to film the building and capture images of abandoned ruins were never seen again. Independent investigators, determined to document the supernatural phenomena, disappeared without a trace. Backpacks were found abandoned, cameras broken, recordings abruptly interrupted, signs that something within the hospital was preventing the stories from being fully recorded. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because disappearances are not just statistics or macabre curiosities. They carry emotional, psychological, and social impact. Each documented case reveals a complexity that goes beyond mere physical disappearance. It's the sense that Hollow Creek exerts an influence on the mind, on decisions, on the very perception of reality. One of the most emblematic cases involves a group of 5 young people, all with video cameras, who decided to spend an entire night exploring the hospital. As dusk fell, they sent messages to friends, reporting strange noises, doors slamming on their own, and a growing sense of being watched. However, when someone tried to contact them the next morning, the group had vanished without a trace. Only backpacks and broken equipment were found, scattered throughout the main hallway, as if they had been hastily abandoned, or perhaps left as part of a silent warning. What makes this case even more disturbing is that all the evidence gathered points to a phenomenon that defies conventional explanations. Audio recordings captured whispers that didn't correspond to the voices of either of the young men. Images captured shadow movements that had no identifiable origin. And the building itself seemed to alter the perception of space, so that corridors seemed to lengthen and doors shifted in subtle, almost imperceptible ways, enough to confuse any attempt at safe navigation. Investigators who analyzed the material concluded that something inside the hospital seemed directly interfere with reality, creating a zone where logic, time, and space mix in a disconcerting way. Other disappearances follow a similar pattern, though each story has its own peculiarities. An investigative journalist entered Hollow Creek alone, searching for old accounts from former employees and local residents. He planned a short exploration, carrying only basic equipment. For the first few hours, everything seemed calm, almost deceptively normal. But as he reviewed the footage, he noticed images of figures moving independently of the camera, shadows passing through walls and doors, and whispers that seemed to be calling his name. Days later, he disappeared without contact, and authorities found only his car parked near the hospital entrance, its equipment untouched. This pattern of disappearances, accompanied by confusing traces, indicates that Hollow Creek is not just the setting for supernatural stories. It is also the scene of aerial and documented impact on human lives. The most disturbing thing is that, in many cases, what is found after the disappearances explains absolutely nothing. Open backpacks, damaged cameras, recordings abruptly interrupted, displaced objects but without any sign of struggle or external presence. Everything suggests that the hospital creates conditions that alter the perception of reality and that somehow controls the narrative of who enters, allowing only fragments of records, as if it were its own form of communication. Longtime residents claim that the building has always been more than walls and corridors, a silent presence that responds to the intentions, courage, and even curiosity of those who dare to cross its rusted gates. As we study the cases in more detail, we realize that Hollow Creek has become a point where the supernatural and true crime meet at a dangerous intersection. It's not just about unexplained disappearances, but about energy that transforms experiences into events that defy logic, irreversibly shaping memories and perceptions. Some records point to search attempts that prove fruitless, rescue teams reporting corridors that seem to shift position, cameras that failed to record certain areas, and signs of presence that disappeared as soon as they were attempted to be documented. It's an environment where decisions, courage, and maximum attention are put to the test, and any mistake, distraction, or miscalculated choice can result in permanent consequences. The most emblematic case further reinforces this sense of enigma. Among the missing young people, a recording was interrupted at the exact moment one of them seemed to spot a humanoid form at the end of the hallway. The audio captured muffled screams and shuffling footsteps, but the image was completely distorted. When teams tried to recreate the scene, they couldn't find the same configuration of hallways, doors, or objects, as if the hospital had decided that this narrative shouldn't be reproduced. This type of phenomenon not only defies scientific explanation, but also creates a hidden truth, a profound psychological impact on family, friends, and explorers who are still trying to understand what really happened. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the disappearances in Hollow Creek isn't just about talking about isolated events, but about how each experience is shaped, how each decision, each step inside the building, becomes a fragment of a much larger enigma. The feeling is of being faced with an entity that observes, that reacts, that creates conditions to record or erase experiences, and that keeps alive both the disappearances and the accounts of those who managed to escape. It's a place of transformation, where the mind, emotions, and perception are tested in ways few can comprehend. Every detail of the disappearance, the traces, the incomplete recordings, the accounts, makes up an invisible but deeply present narrative that challenges us to reflect on courage, limits, and the very definition of reality. Comment there, I'm on this journey too. Now, when we start looking at the disappearances and the phenomena surrounding the Hollow Creek Hospital, we realize that the line between reality and speculation becomes tenuous, almost imperceptible. Every report, every trace found, every shadow captured in photos or videos challenges our understanding of what is possible. And it is precisely at this point that theories begin to emerge, human attempts to make sense of the inexplicable. Some believe that it all boils down to a human crime, a series of events orchestrated by people with dark intentions. After all, ancient records show that the hospital wasn't just an abandoned building. It was a place where bad decisions, negligence, and abuse accumulated, creating a history of suffering and unexplained deaths. This raises the possibility that malicious individuals may have taken advantage of the place's solitude and abandonment for purposes that defy even our morality. Other researchers and enthusiasts point to the possibility of satanic cults or occult rituals when analyzing old documents, testimonies from residents, and small clues found around the hospital. Some inconsistencies stand out. Strange inscriptions on the walls, objects found apparently intentionally, and reports of nocturnal ceremonies performed in silence. For many, this would explain some of the disappearances and supernatural phenomena, creating a bridge between human action and paranormal experience. However, even these clues are inconclusive, and the line between superstition and concrete evidence remains blurred, leaving room for doubt, questioning, and heated debate. There are still those who believe that the hospital was the scene of secret military or scientific experiments, something that escaped the understanding of the population and even local authorities. This theory is based on fragmented records and documents that were partially erased or destroyed over the years. Testimonies indicate that some wings of the building could have been used for unauthorized research, psychological experiments, or even attempts to manipulate the human mind. These accounts, if true, would explain the profound impact the environment seemed to have on the perception of those who entered, interfering with memory, decision-making, and even the very notion of space and time. The possibility that Hollow Creek was a kind of secret experiment laboratory adds an element of complexity to the story, showing how facts, legends, and theories intertwine, leaving traces that have never been fully unraveled. But there is also a more disturbing theory, one that completely defies human logic and rational explanations. The idea that the hospital is somehow a place endowed with its own consciousness, capable of influencing and even controlling those who dare enter its corridors. This hypothesis is not based on documents or formal investigations, but rather on patterns repeatedly observed in the accounts of explorers, missing persons, and survivors. The psychological, emotional, and even physical impact recorded on visitors indicates that the building is not merely a passive setting. It acts, reacts, and creates conditions for experiences that defy all conventional logic. Here, the supernatural and the human merge in a kind of mysterious dance, in which every step, every decision, and every perception can be transformed by a force no one can fully comprehend. The hospital's official investigations, attempting to clarify the disappearances, reveal profound flaws. Records were erased, reports contradicted testimonies, and documents that should have brought clarity ended up reinforcing the mystery. Authorities mentioned protocols that were never applied, searches that ended abruptly, and information disappearing without explanation. This lack of concrete answers creates a hidden truth, a space where every theory, every hypothesis, and every narrative becomes part of a puzzle that no one has ever been able to fully piece together. It is in this context that the hospital story goes beyond the realm of crime or the isolated supernatural and becomes a true research journey in which every detail is vital, every record questionable, and every memory may carry a fragment of truth. What's intriguing is that, even with so many gaps, Hollow Creek continues to fascinate those who approach it. It's not just fear or curiosity. It has a profound impact on our mindset, on how we understand limits, reality, and courage. Each theory reflects the human desire to understand, control, and name the inexplicable, but also evidence that perhaps there is something greater than ourselves, something that escapes any explanation. The feeling that sets in is that the hospital holds secrets that resist the passage of time, revelations that can only be glimpsed by those who dare to approach, without ever being able to take the whole truth with them. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding Hollow Creek isn't just about deciphering disappearances or confirming supernatural accounts. It's about delving behind the scenes of a story that blends human decisions, unknown forces, psychological transformations, and emotions that linger long after someone leaves the building. It's an experience that challenges perception, logic, and courage, and that confronts each of us with questions that may never have definitive answers. Every theory, every investigation, every lost or contradictory document is a fragment of a larger enigma, and each surviving testimony adds a layer to the complexity of this story. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Now, if we think about the stories of Hollow Creek, it's impossible to ignore those few who made it back. They are the survivors, those who walked its corridors, felt the weight of the invisible presence, heard whispers that still echo in their memories, and managed to leave, but not without carrying with them deep scars, psychological scars, and experiences that defy logic. These final testimonies are not just accounts. They are fragments of a distorted reality, a contact with a truth that seems to exist in a parallel layer where human perception is intensely and often cruelly tested. Urban explorers who recorded everything on camera say that, while inside the hospital, the spaces seemed alive, doors that moved on their own, corridors that lengthened or shortened, shadows that belonged to no one, and whispers that seemed to call out their names, knowing intimate details of their lives. For those who heard these stories, the feeling is total immersion, almost as if we were feeling the fear and confusion they experienced. An investigative journalist, for example, entered with the intention of documenting only the hospital's abandoned architecture and historical records. At first, everything seemed too quiet, and he even considered underestimating the atmosphere. But gradually, he began to hear footsteps behind him, voices barely distinguishable from the wind and echo of the hallways, and doors creaking at a frequency unbecoming of the building's aging structure. He reported feeling that someone or something was attentive to every movement, ready to react to the slightest distraction. When he finally emerged, he was physically unharmed, but reported having lost track of time, direction, and even reality itself for hours inside the hospital. And even days later, small images and sounds from the recordings continue to haunt his mind, making it clear that Hollow Creek is not limited to physical space. It infiltrates perception, memory, and the interpretation of reality. Former hospital employees who returned years later to relive memories and better understand the disappearance reports describe similarly disturbing sensations. A former nurse, now retired, said that even decades later he could feel the heaviness of the hallways, as if the building were capable of storing emotional energy. He recalls patients reporting hearing voices when no one was around, doors locking themselves, and shadows moving independently. The experience left deep scars, shaping his mindset about life, death, and the perception of the unknown. For him, Hollow Creek isn't just a building. It's an entity that transforms anyone who dares to cross its doors. And the psychological impact of surviving it is as intense as the fear we feel when hearing these stories. Explorers who entered with cameras, flashlights, and recorders, with clear investigative objectives, report situations that border on the surreal. Some claim to have felt the building react to their thoughts and intentions, as if testing their decisions and limits. Sudden movements, unexplained sounds, shadows appearing without origin, all contribute to the feeling that the hospital is not a neutral space. Each testimony brings inevitable contradictions, because personal experience alters memory and perception in unique ways, reinforcing the idea that Hollow Creek cannot be fully understood, only lived and felt. There are reports of survivors who attempted to record their experiences in audio and video, but found that not all the evidence remained consistent. Audio recordings captured voices whispering instructions that weren't there. Video footage showed shadows that weren't present at the time of recording. And even photos showed unexplained deformations in hallways and doors. Each survivor brought with them a sense of a hidden truth, something that cannot be fully documented, but leaves a profound and lasting impact. The journey inside the hospital, then, becomes something much greater than a simple exploration. It is a transformative experience, challenging courage, perception, and even beliefs about reality. What's striking about the final testimonies is that, even after surviving, no one returns unchanged. Everyone carries a sense of strangeness, discomfort, and continuous questioning about what is real and what is manipulated by the very essence of the place. And it is this mixture of survival and doubt that keeps the hospital's aura of mystery alive. Because even those who return carry fragments of experiences that defy explanation, transform mindsets, and reveal that previous disappearances may have been just part of something much larger, an invisible mechanism that remains active. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the final testimonies show us that understanding Hollow Creek is not just about compiling accounts, but about investigating decisions, emotional impacts, and internal transformations of each survivor. It explores how a space can profoundly shape human experiences, affecting perception, memory, and even future choices, and how each fragment of reality recorded by survivors is, in fact, a piece behind the scenes of a puzzle that remains unsolved. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. As we reflect on everything revealed thus far, it's impossible not to feel the weight of Hollow Creek looming over every detail, every memory and every account that has come down to us. The silent hallways, the broken windows that let in light irregularly, the shadows that seem to move independently, all of this reminds us that we are dealing with something that transcends time and common logic. Each disappearance, each whisper, each survivor who has returned to tell their story adds layers of complexity to an enigma that still defies rational explanation. And it is precisely in this absence of concrete answers that the narrative's strength lies. No one has ever been able to fully decipher what happens inside that building. And perhaps this is the essence of the impact Hollow Creek has on those who approach. It's not just fear. It's a sense of hidden truth, that there is something that we, as human beings, are not yet prepared to understand, but that makes us question decisions, perceptions, and even the very nature of reality. The history of Hollow Creek is not just one of disappearances or isolated supernatural phenomena. It is a day, an invitation to explore the boundaries between courage and recklessness, curiosity and obsession, reality and perception. Each final testimony we learn, each surviving explorer, and each document or photograph that remains behind the scenes reveals not only facts, but also the psychological and emotional transformation the hospital provokes. There is something profoundly human in this setting. The attempt to understand, control, and make sense of experiences that defy logic. It is in this confrontation between rationality and mystery that the place's true impact lies. And it is also there that we realize how the story of Hollow Creek lives on, fueling debates, theories, and investigations that will never have a definitive end. What's truly striking is that, even with so much fragmented evidence, the hospital maintains an aura of power and influence. It's not just an abandoned building. It's almost as if it has a consciousness of its own, manipulating the environment, altering perceptions, and transforming any visitor into part of its narrative. Every whisper heard, every shadow perceived, every detail that defies reason is a reminder that Hollow Creek operates on multiple levels, affecting emotions, decisions, and even the very mindset of those who venture there. There's a silent and inevitable transformation, a reconfiguration of how we understand space, time, and the very notion of safety. It's impossible to escape its effects without leaving changed, without carrying with you a part of the mystery that makes it as fascinating as it is terrifying. And perhaps it's precisely this lack of clear answers that keeps the hospital relevant today. With each story, each incomplete investigation, and each survivor's account, we are reminded that Hollow Creek remains an impact site, a point where reality, legend, and emotional experience meet. It challenges us to reflect on the decisions we make, the curiosity that drives us to explore the unknown, and the courage required to confront what we cannot explain. Amid shadows and echoes of the past, we realize that the truth about the hospital was never fully revealed, that official documents contradict local accounts, and that collective memory preserves fragments that logic alone cannot decipher. There is a fascinating duality between what is visible and what remains hidden, between individual experience and collective narrative. And it is this tension that keeps the aura of Hollow Creek alive. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because, as we analyze every detail, every disappearance, and every survivor's account, we realize that the hospital's history is not just about past events, but about the journey of those who dare to investigate, about decisions, risks, and transformations that accumulate over time. Every abandoned corridor, every creaking door, and every unexpected shadow serves as a metaphor for the human search for truth, for understanding the inexplicable, and for confronting personal limits. And even with all the documentation, interviews, and records, the feeling remains that Hollow Creek was never truly abandoned. Something remains active, latent, shaping perceptions, keeping alive the echoes of everything that happened and everything that was lost. Perhaps this is the most disturbing point. The hospital exists not just as a physical space, but as emotional and psychological impact that spans generations, challenging courage, perception, and understanding. It reminds us that some truths can be so complex that they can only be experienced, felt, and reflected upon, never fully explained. And in this mystery, each story, each survivor, and each disappearance are interwoven into a fabric that blends reality and legend, creating a powerful, unsettling narrative that remains alive even decades after its closure. Perhaps in the end, Hollow Creek was never truly abandoned. Perhaps it's just that the living have stopped entering. Comment there. That makes sense to me. If you've made it this far, it means you've truly immersed yourself in this story with me. Felt the tension of the abandoned corridors, heard the whispers of the voices that never stopped, and reflected on each unexplained disappearance. And that's precisely why your participation makes all the difference. When you leave a comment, a like, or simply connect with the content, you're helping keep the investigation of these mysteries alive, allowing more people to experience this same immersion and reflection. So if this video resonated with you or sparked your curiosity, leave a comment below. I'm with you until the end. This way, we know this journey isn't just mine, but belongs to everyone who ventures into this universe of mysterious stories. If you enjoyed this deep dive and this narrative, give it a natural like, because it symbolizes that you felt every detail, every shadow, and every story that brought Hollow Creek to life this far. And to continue this exploration, there's a video here that complements this topic, with more mysteries and revelations that go beyond what we've already seen. Click and stay with me there, because the story isn't over yet, and each step brings us closer to understanding what really happens in these places where reality blends with the inexplicable. Subscribe to the channel to continue following this type of content, because we'll continue exploring not only stories and disappearances, but also behind-the-scenes stories, decisions, transformations, and all the hidden truths these stories hold. Here, each video is designed to make you feel, reflect, and question, and having you along on this journey makes it all the more meaningful. So leave a comment, like it, tune in for the next video, and let's continue this investigation of what remains hidden and impossible to forget.